Hi, this is Harold Ainsworth, and in this tutorial we're going to look at the challenges and solutions to project governance in a disruptive world that we experience today. So as an overview, we know that organisations are changing in response to many things, including, of course, the recent COVID-19, but also program and project management is subject to change today, and we'll look at some of that. And so the question is whether governance of programs and project initiatives are adapting to the change, and if so, what are the risks if they're not? A survey by the Australian Institute of Project Management and KPMG in 2020 showed that organisations that were successful at project delivery had good governance in the form of engaged sponsors, good practices, formal benefits management, and also independent reviews. And we'll talk about those later, which are useful. So there's a lot of lack of clarity about project governance role. It is a subset of corporate governance, and the principles of corporate governance need to flow down. But often there can be confusion between governance and management. And while they're symbiotic, they are not the same. And we'll explore that as we go through. And there's also many layers of governance, and that brings its own overheads. So corporate governance, in this slide, it cascades down to the portfolio level, which today is called governance of projects. And then that comes down to project governance, which is about program and project level governance. And sitting underneath that as a support is the PMO, Program Management Office, methodologies, and the various levels of support for projects and programs. Now, on the left-hand side are some arrows which summarise some of the OECD governance principles, which are quite sound, and this is a very highly summarised version of it. But it talks about transparency, accountability, responsibility, and these being clear, of course, and fairness. And fairness can mean many things, but including the fact that governance needs to be for the organisation as a whole and not just for parts thereof. Now, this is a very busy slide and we won't talk to all of it, but this is a new standard coming out of the UK government in 2018 of a delivery system. And the idea is at the top are principles, and there's 9 of them, and they cascade down across all the layers. And we can see the layers there of portfolio, programs, projects, and other sort of business activities. And so the question is, with all these layers of governance, do we have the right governance? Now, this new standard recognises the close integration of portfolios, programs, and project management, which should be all designed to deliver business value, because that, at the end of the day, is what governance is about. Now, the 9 principles that I mentioned are summarised here in my own words. There's the alignment to corporate objectives, the focus on achieving business value and minimising the risk to this, not just the risk to delivery, but the risk to achieving the business value. Governance needs to be scaled based on the risk of the undertaking, so not too heavy. Accountabilities and responsibilities need to be clear and traceable. Improvements need to be made based on the organisation's experience and lessons from its programs and projects. And the enabling outputs and then the final outcomes should be validated by stakeholders for whom the work is being done. And of course, we need effective change and transition management, and we all know that today that is so important in order to be able to achieve the outcomes and benefits that we plan. So these principles, as I said, need to cascade down through all the layers. And on the right-hand side, you'll see that in an organisation, typically there can be many layers. There may be an enterprise portfolio, there may be some division portfolios, there'll be programs and projects. So this introduces quite a number of layers. And so there needs to be clear clarity around what decisions are made at each level and what their responsibilities and accountabilities are at each level. Otherwise, there can be some confusion or overlap. And of course, portfolios have a longer lifespan than programs and projects, which are shorter, and they will have a slightly different focus, but nonetheless, it's all part of an integrated delivery system designed to deliver value. Now, there are other challenges occurring today. Many organisations are undertaking digital transformation initiatives, and these are challenging for a couple of reasons. One is because of the new emerging technologies, and the hype cycle on the right-hand side talks about this. There is a lot of hype around technologies, but they are happening and they will continue to happen, and they are starting to be implemented. And when we talk about digital, we're not just talking about communications, we're talking about big data, data analytics, artificial intelligence and other technologies that are basically emerging and beginning to make an impact. And one of the other challenges is, of course, is when you embark on these, the end is not quite clear because things are going to emerge along the way. There's also an increasing adoption of agile approaches beyond IT, but at an organisation level. On the right-hand side there is an image from Scaled Agile, which is one of the approaches used. And this, of course, disrupts the traditional approach. They have at the top level value streams. They then have agile release trains and programs. And then underneath they have iterations. So they've done away with the word project and they talk about iterations. And they also talk about lean governance and lean budgets and we'll talk about that further later on. So there are also changes to the thinking about programs and projects. Projects in particular emerged out of engineering disciplines and construction disciplines many years ago, which were much more sort of stable environments, much more controllable. Today we now operate with higher levels of complexity in complex terrain, where the things we are doing are different and they're much more widespread than they used to be. The processes are not just traditional processes, but also what we call social processes, because there are many stakeholders involved and they can have a major impact on our projects and programs. And there's a lot of focus on the people and the teams as well. Today, value creation is the prime focus, not just the physical outputs. The programs and projects can be multidisciplinary, with lots of people coming from various backgrounds and multi-purpose, and they may change over time. And this particularly is true with digital, where it is difficult to predict the end of the journey, and things do emerge and there are changes required. We also see the emergence of the reflective practitioner who can adapt. And so it doesn't matter what they've been taught in the past, they need to adapt to new methods, new approaches, new circumstances. And PMOs, program management officers, have come and gone in the past for various reasons. And today they are being challenged to be more strategic and transformational and be part of the change in the organisation. And of course, the question is raised, are they ready for that role? So some of the key questions that we can be asking ourselves in the light of the changes that we've talked about: are members of governance forums fully equipped for their role today with all these challenges? Do they understand their role? Do they understand the agile approach and what it may involve? And it does involve a lot of different things, including the idea of the minimal viable product, the idea that you don't sort of produce the full-blown version, but you produce something and you experiment and try it out and adapt. And that, of course, is quite different to what we have done in the past. The technology disruption, it's not about understanding the technology so much, but it's understanding the transformation that it brings to business models and the way that business is done today. And this is changing rapidly. And due to this, there is a lot of uncertainty and there's a lot of emergence of new situations that can't be predicted. Also, the people on governance forums often come from an operating business mindset. They run more traditional types of business operations. And they need to, when they're in the governance forum, adopt a project mindset. So what do we mean by this? Well, project managers often talk about the project burn rate. By that they mean how much money the project is spending each day out of their finite budgets. I was reading a report recently that said for mega projects in the infrastructure space, they can spend between $1 to $3 million a day. And that's a lot of money, and you need to be sure that you're making good use of it. So decision-making processes, resource mobilisation needs to be very, very timely. And often, of course, in these big complex undertakings, there's a lot of uncertainty compared to the desire for the organisation to have more stability and control and predictability. And it may not be possible in all cases. And so we have to be able to adapt to that. So quickly, just to do a recap, we've talked about management versus governance. Management often is more control focused, governance is more delivery of value. There are layers, the various layers across the delivery system, and we need to take an integrated view across those layers. The need for clarity around the roles and responsibilities at each level. How digital and agile is starting to bring in new ideas and new approaches, and also the general change of focus in projects and how that impacts on the role of governance. And so lastly, we asked the question, are governance forum members equipped for this new role today? So going forward, we will now look at structures and roles and raise some questions. We'll look at processes and whether they're in place and working, and what sort of support might be provided to governance forums to help them do their work in this disruptive world. So as we look at the structures and the roles, do principles drive the structures and the roles? One of the challenges today across the delivery system, there is so much information about standards, practices, guides, what we should do, methods, but principles will help us to understand this and ensure that we come back to the important things, because principles are much more sort of contained and clear. Is there clarity in the roles at each layer, and are they balanced, and does everybody have the right understanding of what their role is? And is accountability operating effectively, and is it transparent? Do people know how it is operating, and do they believe that it is operating effectively? Is governance scaled according to the risk of the initiative? Sometimes it's possible to have too much governance. The question is it right for that level of initiative? Is there a culture of open reporting? Is it actually practice? Everyone says that it is, but sometimes down at the lower levels, they don't want to report bad news, and delays in reporting the news can mean that you lose the opportunity to take effective action. Is there a strong focus on value reporting beyond traditional scope, time and cost? And so the question is, at the governance forum, what time is spent on reporting on value compared to the traditional sort of reports? So are the suitable processes in place and working? And we have two slides here. Are our approaches adaptive? Particularly with Agile, but not just with Agile, we need to often overlay a network approach across the normal structure. That's not taking away the traditional hierarchical structure, but simply also having a network approach which goes across various parts of the organisation, because that's how projects, and particularly Agile projects, operate. And so can that work within the hierarchical organisation? And some organisations say, yes, we want to be both Agile and we want to also do some of the traditional approaches, and they adopt a mixture. There's no correct hybrid approach, and so every organisation has to find a way of doing this that works for them. Now, we've talked about lean governance and lean budgets. Lean governance means several things. It means having the right level of control, not too much, but right level. But it also means devolving responsibility down to lower levels in the organisation to allow them to get on with their work and and be responsible for it. Lean budgets means making certain that the budgets at the organisational level and not sort of focused on a particular part of the organisation. It also means that sometimes we may not want to spend as long on doing very detailed business cases, but rather sort of do it at a higher level. And this particularly comes out with the idea of budgets at a value stream level. The idea of the value stream is that's the end-to-end customer, from the time the customer first engages with the organisation for a transaction till that transaction is finished is a value stream. And those value streams cut across various parts of the organisation. If we look at that, then we say, how do we add value and make certain that we are getting the best value for ourselves and the customer? And allocate a budget at that level. Now, that's not the traditional business case approach, and it requires a lot more flexibility and a lot more different approach to doing things. With the value focus, are we actually checking on whether we get the value? Do we have good methods in place to track benefits and the business change activity? Both across the life cycle of the program or the project, but also afterwards. And this is where post-implementation reviews come in. These are traditionally conducted 6 or 12 months after the program or project is finished and is looking at whether we achieve the value. Now, some very valuable lessons can come out of this, and it's not saying we need them for every project, but we do need them for selected projects in order to learn and check whether the processes are working well. And so organisations that are doing well have these in place, and they are effective processes. We also need project assurance, and there's various ways that we can do this. Some organisations have gating. Sometimes it works well, sometimes it doesn't. Is risk management working well? Going beyond a tick the box so that it actually becomes very, very effective and allows the organisation to manage and take on risky activities. Also, the other term we use is 3 lines of defence. Are they in place when required? 3 lines of defence typically means that there are activities beyond the project that will help the governance forum know whether things are working as planned. They can be a review by the PMO, it can be a review by an independent audit group within the organisation, or even by an external party that comes in to review the project or program. And we need to be able to deal effectively with the uncertainty issue through appropriate workarounds. So do our processes allow that to happen? And by that we may mean experimentation, prototyping, taking alternative approaches, and generally accepting the fact that there is uncertainty and that we can't be certain of everything about the project. In terms of reporting, today we often use the term provenance of information, which is meaning that we can be sure that information as it passes up through the organisation to the governance forum is not filtered. If it is filtered, then they are not receiving the useful information they need for decisions. Another word we can use is line of sight. But another form that's come out today is perception-based reporting, where members of governance forums anonymously provide perceptions on various issues, such as whether they believe the project will be successful, whether they think there's some certain problems, and also the quality of the meeting. And this is important because if the governance forum meetings are not working effectively, then you're losing something. And so the diagrams on the right-hand side are showing us some of the graphs that come out of this perception reporting. So this is anonymous, but it can be put together and help us to know, in addition to the traditional reporting, how things are working. These are the often unspoken things that people don't say in meetings, but are nonetheless very important. So we can check on this through a health check on the processes and any gaps that might exist. So support for governance. How does governance forums learn and improve? Some organisations provide kits to help people who are members of governance forum understand their role and how they can conduct that role. Another idea I've heard of is an experienced person sitting in and helping them ask the right questions. Also, is the capability of the PMO appropriate to the new challenges that are emerging today? Do we need to provide training? Do we need to provide support to them or bring in new people who have the appropriate skills? So moving beyond the control focus, which governance has often had, we need to provide leadership and build organisational capability at all levels to help with future value delivery. And I'll talk about that a bit more later on. Another way we can support governance is by providing questions for them to ask. Probing questions promote discussion and allow investigation and also surface assumptions. And here are some coming back to one of the original books on benefits realisation. 4 questions, simple but very important to ask, very probing. Are we doing the right things? Rather than are we doing them the right way, which is also important, which is about integration. Are we getting them done well, which is about the efficiency and the capability? And importantly, are we getting the benefits from them? So these can help us to promote useful discussion. Also, particularly with large undertakings, it's sometimes difficult to understand all the bits and pieces along the way. And so we can map that in a visual way that helps people to understand it. And so this is a very simple mapping of, there's a couple of initiatives, there's certain change activities, there's some interim capabilities and outcomes, and we can put measures on these, and they help us to know whether we're going to get the end benefits and whether they will contribute to the strategic objectives. Now, these sort of maps help us to surface assumptions, they help us to understand the risks, particularly to the benefits, and to ensure that all the change activities and impacts are addressed, and also, of course, provide some interim measures or leading indicators to help us know whether we are on track to achieve the benefits. You may not do them for all projects, but certainly for critical projects, it's a great way of getting everybody, as they say, on the same page. Now, governance forum members also constantly needing to be looking at the return on investment compared to the funding investment, as shown here. And so what they need is good information. I talked before about provenance of information, getting the right information. We also need very good initial estimates of both costs and benefits, rather than the sometimes optimistic ones that are put up. We also need a way of tracking whether we're on track. And of course, the maps that I talked about on the previous slide with the interim measures and the leading indicators help us to do this. Now, some of these returns on investment may be dollar terms, and they may be long-term, or they may be social measures, particularly in government. So the question is, does the governance forum have the right level of information to make these decisions? Because if they're not getting the return on investment, they may want to reprioritise or even stop the program or project. So as we've looked at what we've talked about, one of the things that comes out is that in the past, in traditional environments, it's been more mechanistic, it's been plan driven, there's been a focus on controls, it's been a more stable environment. But we've talked about the fact that today it's a more dynamic environment and it's more complex, and therefore it needs, at some levels, more organic approaches. It needs to be lean, it needs to be collaborative, it needs to be adaptive. And they often use the term of able to pivot and able to change, to respond to emerging situations. Now, this will need great leadership and capability building in order to achieve this. And so the organisation needs to find the right balance In one report I was reading recently, they talked about at the top level, it was more mechanistic, but down at the work face, it was more organic. And so we need to find something that suits both the organisation and the structure and the projects they are undertaking. So we've talked about structures and roles, the processes in place and whether they're working, and also, very importantly, how we support the governance forums today to do their work. You might consider, if a brief and focused workshop around a health check may be useful to identify gaps and solutions in your organisation, because at a corporate level today, many organisations are undertaking board level health checks to make certain that governance is working well. Now, there are obviously lots of questions that can come out of this. This is some that we've already been asked or could be asked, and you might have further questions that might come out of it for you. If you do, and you've listened to this tutorial, we'd be happy to discuss the questions on the previous slide, or if you have your own list of questions, we'd be happy to discuss those with you too. All you need to do is contact Jacqueline. We'd welcome your feedback and questions and the opportunity to talk to you about them and try and help you work through them. Thank you.